The storm hit on the night Quinton Reed decided he was leaving for good, soaking the gravel driveway of the Montana estate he had bought, but never truly inhabited. He stood in the kitchen of the sprawling ranch house, phone pressed to his ear while his assistant confirmed the jet would be ready at dawn. 3 days maximum, he had told himself when he arrived 2 weeks ago. 3 days to sign the property transfer documents, meet with the local attorneys about dissolving the conservation trust his grandfather had established, and return to New York where his shipping empire demanded constant attention. But somehow 3 days had stretched into 14, and he still had not signed a single paper. "Cancel tomorrow's meeting," he said into the phone, watching rain streak down the windows. "Reschedule everything for next week. I'll be back in the city by Monday." He ended the call and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light from the wrought iron chandelier overhead. The house was too big, too quiet, filled with furniture he had never chosen and memories of a grandfather he had barely known. Selling it made perfect sense. The conservation land could be better managed by the state. He had no ties here, no reason to keep pouring money into maintaining a property he visited once every 5 years. The knock at the door startled him. It was past 10 o'clock, and the nearest neighbor was 3 miles down the mountain road. He crossed the living room, boots echoing on the hardwood, and pulled open the heavy oak door to find a woman standing on his porch, drenched to the bone. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, water dripping from her dark hair into her eyes. "My car went off the road about a mile back." "I saw your lights." Quinton stepped aside without hesitation. "Come in. You're freezing." She hesitated only a moment before crossing the threshold, leaving puddles on the floor. "I tried my phone, but there's no signal up here. The storm must have taken out the cell tower." "Happens every spring," he said, grabbing a blanket from the back of the couch and handing it to her. "Let me get you something dry to wear. I don't want to impose. If I could just use your phone to call for help. Landline's out too." "Storm took down some trees across the power lines about an hour ago. We're running on the backup generator." He studied her in the light. She was younger than him, maybe late 20s, with striking features and eyes that seemed determined not to show fear despite her obvious discomfort. "I'm Quinton." "Whitney," she said, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "Whitney Vaughn." He showed her to the guest bathroom, found some clothes that would be comically oversized on her but at least dry, and returned to the kitchen to make coffee. When she emerged 20 minutes later, swimming in one of his sweatshirts and a pair of sweatpants she had rolled at the ankles, he had to suppress a smile. "Better?" he asked. "Much, thank you." She accepted the mug he offered and wrapped both hands around it. "I really am sorry about this. I should have checked the weather before I left town." "What brings you up the mountain in a storm?" She hesitated, and he saw something flicker across her face. Sadness, maybe, or regret. "I was visiting the old Morrison place. My grandmother used to work there years ago. She passed away last month, and I've been going through her things. Found some letters she had written but never sent. I thought maybe if I saw the place one more time, I'd understand what she was trying to say in them." Quinton leaned against the counter. "The Morrison place burned down 15 years ago. I know, I just wanted to see where it had been." She took a sip of coffee. "Sounds foolish, doesn't it?" "No," he said quietly. "It sounds like you loved her." Whitney's eyes met his, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to fade. "I did. She raised me after my parents died when I was 8. She was everything to me." They talked for hours that night. She told him about growing up in the small town of Whitefish, 40 miles away, about her work as a veterinarian at a rural practice that served ranchers and farmers across 3 counties. He found himself telling her things he rarely shared. about the pressure of running a company with 12,000 employees, about board meetings and hostile takeovers, and the constant weight of expectation. She listened without judgment, asking questions that suggested she actually cared about the answers. "So why are you here?" she asked eventually. "This doesn't seem like your kind of place." "It's not," he admitted. "My grandfather left it to me when he died. I've been trying to figure out what to do with it. Sell it. That was the plan." Was? He did not know how to answer that. The rain had slowed to a drizzle and the clock on the wall read 3 in the morning. "You should get some sleep. We'll figure out your car situation in the daylight." She nodded and rose, carrying her empty mug to the sink. "Quinton, thank you not just for the shelter, for the conversation." "Anytime," he said and meant it. The next morning broke clear and bright, the storm having scrubbed the sky clean. Quinton woke early as always and found Whitney already up, standing on the back deck with a mug of coffee, looking out at the mountains. "It's beautiful here," she said when he joined her. "I can see why your grandfather loved it. You knew him. Not well. But everyone in town knew old Thomas Reed. He used to come into the feed store where my grandmother worked sometimes. Always had a kind word, always asked after people's families." She glanced at him. "You look like him, actually. Same jaw, same eyes." Quinton said nothing. He barely remembered the man, recalled only stern photographs, and the sense that he had disappointed someone by choosing business school over environmental science. "I should check on your car," he said instead. They drove down the mountain in his truck, following the muddy road until they found her sedan nose down in a ditch, the front end crumpled against a boulder. Whitney made a small sound of distress. "Insurance will cover it," Quinton said, though he could tell from the damage that the car was totaled. "I can't afford the deductible right now," she said quietly. "I just made a huge payment on my student loans. Let me handle it." She looked at him sharply. "Absolutely not. I don't take charity." "It's not charity. Consider it payment for the best conversation I've had in months, Quinton. We'll call it a loan if it makes you feel better. Pay me back whenever." He pulled out his phone, found a local towing company in his contacts, and made the call before she could protest further. The tow truck took an hour to arrive. In that time, they walked back toward the house, taking a detour through the forested land that comprised the majority of the estate. Whitney identified birds by their calls, pointed out animal tracks in the soft earth, explained the ecosystem with the kind of passion that only came from genuine love of the subject. "Your grandfather protected all of this," she said, gesturing at the towering pines and the meadow visible through the trees. "Do you know how rare that is? How many developers would kill for this land?" "I've had 17 offers in the last year," Quinton admitted. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Please tell me you're not selling to developers. The Conservation Trust specifies the land can't be developed, but I could dissolve the trust and sell it to the state or donate it to a national organization. But nothing." "That's the logical choice." Whitney studied him for a long moment. "You don't strike me as someone who does things just because they're logical." He wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, that every decision he made was calculated and rational. But standing there in the morning light, with this woman who had crashed into his life during a storm, he found he could not quite make the words come out. They spent the rest of the day together. He told himself it was only polite, that she needed a ride back to town anyway, that it would be rude to send her away before lunch. But when lunch turned into dinner, and dinner turned into evening drinks on the deck, he had to admit he was finding excuses. "I should go," Whitney said finally, as the sun dipped behind the mountains. "You've been incredibly kind, but you probably have work to do." "Stay," Quinton said, the word escaping before he could think better of it. "I mean, it's late. The roads are probably still a mess. Stay another night and I'll drive you home tomorrow." She hesitated, and he saw the war playing out behind her eyes. Good sense versus curiosity, propriety versus desire. "Okay," she said softly. "One more night." That night they played cards at the kitchen table, drank wine that was far too expensive for the casual way they were drinking it, and laughed until Quinton's sides hurt. She told him stories about the animals she treated, about the time she had to stitch up a rooster that had gotten into a fight with a coyote, about the rancher who insisted his cow was depressed and needed therapy. He found himself sharing things he never spoke about, the loneliness of his position, the way success had isolated him from genuine human connection, the suspicion that everyone wanted something from him. "I don't want anything from you," Whitney said, her voice serious. "Except maybe another glass of wine and the story about what really happened at that board meeting you mentioned." So he told her, and she listened. And somewhere in the telling he realized he did not want her to leave. The next morning, Quinton made breakfast while Whitney showered. He was scrambling eggs when his phone rang, the screen showing his assistant's number. "The Thompson merger fell through," James said without preamble. "The board wants you back immediately. There's an emergency meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning." Quinton looked out the window at Whitney's borrowed clothes hanging on the line to dry, at the mountains beyond, at the life he had stumbled into by accident. "Move the meeting to next week." "Sir, this is urgent. If we don't act fast, we could lose the entire deal." "Then we lose it." "I'll be back when I'm back." He ended the call and turned back to the eggs, which had started to burn. Whitney appeared in the doorway, her hair still damp. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said, scraping the pan. "How do you feel about slightly charred eggs?" She laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen like music. They drove into Whitefish that afternoon, ostensibly so Whitney could deal with insurance paperwork and arrange for a rental car. But somehow the errand turned into lunch at a small diner where everyone seemed to know her, then a walk through town, then dinner at a restaurant overlooking the lake. "You're stalling," Whitney said as they lingered over dessert. "Maybe." "Why?" Quinton set down his fork and met her eyes. "Because I like being around you. Because for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. Because you look at me like I'm just a person, not a bank account or a business opportunity." Color rose in her cheeks. "I like being around you too, but Quinton, our lives are completely different. You run a shipping empire. I treat sick horses and help birth calves at 3 in the morning. In a few days, you'll go back to New York and this will just be a strange interlude." "What if I don't want it to be an interlude?" "What are you saying?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm saying I want to see where this goes. I'm saying I haven't felt this way about anyone in longer than I can remember. I'm saying please don't dismiss this just because the timing is inconvenient." Whitney's fingers tightened around his. "This is crazy." "Probably." "You live across the country. I have a private jet. I can't just drop my life to follow you around. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to give me a chance to figure out how to make this work." She was quiet for a long moment, and Quinton felt his heart hammering in his chest in a way it never did during billion-dollar negotiations. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's see where this goes." They started slowly, carefully, like two people learning to navigate unfamiliar terrain. Quinton extended his stay in Montana, conducting business from the ranch house, taking video calls on the deck, while Whitney worked her shifts at the veterinary clinic. In the evenings, she would drive up the mountain and they would cook dinner together or walk the property, or simply sit by the fire and talk. He learned that she had wanted to be a vet since she was 6 years old, that her favorite ice cream was mint chocolate chip, that she had a scar on her left knee from falling out of a tree when she was 12. She learned that he had built his company from nearly nothing after his father had run the original family business into the ground, that he was terrified of failure, that he had not had a meaningful relationship in 5 years, because he could never tell who wanted him versus who wanted his money. "I want you," Whitney said one night, curled up next to him on the couch. "Just so we're clear." Quinton kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. Duly noted. 3 weeks became 4, then 5. His assistant called daily with increasingly urgent requests for his return. The board was getting restless. Investors were asking questions. Competitors were circling. "You have to go back eventually," Whitney said one morning over coffee. "I know. So when?" He did not have an answer. Every time he opened his laptop to book a return flight, he found a reason to delay. One more day. One more week. Just a little more time. The crisis came 6 weeks into his extended stay. James called at 6 in the morning, his voice tight with stress. "Sir, I've been covering for you as much as I can, but the situation with the Meridian contract is spiraling. They're threatening to pull out entirely if you don't show up for the meeting next week. We're talking about losing $300 million and possibly triggering a cascade of other contract cancellations." Quinton sat up in bed, careful not to wake Whitney beside him. "Set up the meeting." "I'll be there." "Thank God. I was starting to think you'd lost your mind." "Maybe I have," Quinton muttered, but James had already hung up. He broke the news to Whitney over breakfast. She took it better than he expected, her face carefully neutral. "How long will you be gone?" she asked. "I don't know. A week, maybe 2. It depends on how bad the damage is." "Okay, you're upset." "I'm not upset. I knew this was coming." She stood and carried her plate to the sink. "You have a company to run, Quinton, I understand that." But he could hear the hurt in her voice, the resignation that suggested she had already started protecting herself from the inevitable. "Come with me," he said suddenly. She turned, eyebrows raised. "To New York. Why not? Take some time off, see the city. Let me show you my world." "I can't just abandon my patients. There are only 3 vets at my clinic and we're already short-staffed. Then I'll come back as soon as I can, and we'll figure out a better system. Video calls every day, flights back and forth, whatever it takes." Whitney crossed her arms and he recognized the defensive posture for what it was. "This is what I was afraid of. The long distance, the complications, the reality crashing in." Quinton stood and crossed to her, taking her shoulders gently. "Look at me. I am not walking away from this, from you. Yes, it's going to be difficult. Yes, we're going to have to work at it, but I meant what I said. I want to make this work." "Why?" she whispered. "Why me? You could have anyone, because you see me, because you make me laugh. Because when I'm with you, I remember who I wanted to be before I got so caught up in who I thought I had to be." He kissed her forehead, then her cheeks, then finally her lips. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Whitney Vaughn, and that terrifies me, but I'm doing it anyway." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm falling in love with you too, that's why this scares me so much." "Then be scared with me, but don't give up on us before we've really tried." She wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest. "Okay, but Quinton, if this is going to work, you have to let me into your life. Really into it. Not just the beautiful parts, but the messy parts too. The stress and the pressure and the impossible decisions. Can you do that?" "I can try," he said, and meant it. He left for New York 2 days later, and the separation was harder than he had anticipated. The first week was a blur of meetings, conference calls, and damage control. He worked 18-hour days, barely slept, and fielded increasingly hostile questions from board members who wondered where his head had been for the last 2 months. But every night, no matter how late, he called Whitney. They talked about everything and nothing, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. She told him about the difficult delivery she had assisted with, about the new intern at the clinic who was enthusiastic but hopelessly clumsy, about the way the mountains looked at sunset. He told her about the negotiations that were slowly getting back on track, about the investor who had cornered him to complain about quarterly returns, about how much he missed her. "I miss you too," she said one night, her face pixelated on his laptop screen. "The house feels too quiet now." "You ruined me for solitude." "Good," he said, smiling despite his exhaustion. "How's Friday? I can fly out Thursday night, spend the weekend, and be back Monday morning." "Really? I promised I'd make this work. That means actually seeing you, not just talking through a screen." The pattern established itself over the following months. Quinton would spend 2 or 3 weeks in New York, managing the company and handling the avalanche of issues that required his physical presence, then fly to Montana for long weekends or week-long stays. Whitney adjusted her schedule as much as she could, taking her days off when he was in town, trading shifts with her colleagues. It was not easy. There were missed calls and canceled plans, arguments born of exhaustion and frustration, moments when the distance felt insurmountable. But there were also perfect mornings waking up tangled together, dinners where they laughed until they cried, quiet evenings reading in front of the fire. "This is working," Whitney said one night in early autumn, lying in his arms under the stars on the ranch house deck. "You sound surprised." "I am a little. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for you to realize this is too much work or for me to resent how much time you spend gone." Quinton tightened his arms around her. "And do you resent it?" "Sometimes," she admitted. "But then you show up, and you've brought my favorite pastries from that bakery in Brooklyn, and you want to hear every detail about my week, and I remember why we're doing this." "I resent it too sometimes," he said quietly. "I hate leaving you. I hate that I can't be here for the little things. But then I think about what my life was like before I met you, and there's no comparison. You're worth the inconvenience." She tilted her head back to kiss him. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. You're worth the inconvenience. I'm a billionaire." I should probably come up with better romantic gestures. "Don't you dare. I like you exactly as you are." In October, Quinton brought Whitney to New York for the first time. She was nervous on the plane, fidgeting with her seatbelt and looking out the window at the clouds below. "What if your friends don't like me?" she asked. "I don't really have friends," Quinton admitted. "Business associates, yes, people I've known for years, certainly, but friends, not really." "That's sad." "It is, isn't it? I think I lost track of the difference somewhere along the way." He showed her his penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and million-dollar view, watched her take in the marble and steel and glass. It looked sterile through her eyes, he realized. Beautiful but empty. A showplace, not a home. "You actually live here?" she asked, running her hand along the spotless granite counter. "Technically, though I'm at the office more often than not." "Where do you keep your books?" "I have a Kindle." "Your photos?" "On my phone." She turned to face him, hands on her hips. "Quinton Reed, this is the saddest apartment I've ever seen. You don't have a single personal item visible." "I have personal items. They're just in the bedroom." She went to investigate and returned shaking her head. "A framed photo of a boat and a motivational quote poster do not count as personal items. This place looks like a hotel." "I've never really thought about it." Whitney walked to the window and looked out at the glittering city below. "Do you like living here?" "I thought I did. Now I'm not so sure." She turned back to him and her expression was soft. "Show me the parts of New York you actually love, not the fancy parts, the real parts." So he did. Over the next 3 days, he took her to the hole-in-the-wall pizza place he had discovered as a hungry college student, to the bookstore where he had spent countless hours hiding from his father's expectations, to the park bench where he had made the decision to strike out on his own and build something new. She met James, who looked at her with poorly concealed relief, and told Quinton later that he seemed more human than he had in years. They walked through the city until her feet hurt, ate at restaurants ranging from food trucks to Michelin-starred establishments, and made love in his sterile apartment, which felt less empty with her in it. On their last night, they attended a gala for one of the charities his company supported. Whitney wore a dress he had insisted on buying her, deep blue silk that made her eyes look enormous, and every head turned when they entered. She handled the attention with grace, making conversation with board members and investors, laughing at terrible jokes, never once seeming intimidated. "She's lovely," Marcus Thompson said, cornering Quinton by the bar. "Very different from your usual type." "I didn't know I had a type. Models and socialites mostly, women who look good on your arm and don't ask difficult questions." Marcus took a sip of his scotch. "This one looks like she asks difficult questions." "She does," Quinton said, watching Whitney across the room as she spoke animatedly with the director of the charity. "It's one of the things I love about her. Love, that's a strong word. It's the right word." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Be careful, Quinton. Women like that, women with real lives and real careers, they don't always understand the demands of what we do. My second wife left me because I missed too many dinners, too many birthdays. She said I loved my company more than I loved her. Did you? Probably. But I told myself I was building something for us, for our future. Turns out she wanted a present, not a future." He clapped Quinton on the shoulder. "I'm not saying you should end it, just be realistic about what you can offer." The conversation bothered Quinton more than he wanted to admit. That night, lying in bed with Whitney curled against his side, he found himself thinking about Marcus's warning. "What are you brooding about?" Whitney asked sleepily. "Nothing. Go back to sleep. You're a terrible liar." She propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at him. "Talk to me." So he told her about the conversation, about Marcus's cynical assessment of relationships and priorities. Whitney listened without interrupting. "You think he's right?" she asked when he finished. "I don't know. I want to say no, but I'm not sure I know how to not put work first. It's all I've done for the last 15 years. Then learn," she said simply. "I'm not saying you have to stop working or stop caring about your company, but there has to be room for both, for us and for your career. What if there isn't? What if Marcus is right and eventually you'll resent how much of my attention the company demands?" Whitney was quiet for a long moment. "I can't promise I'll never feel frustrated or lonely. But I can promise I'll talk to you about it instead of letting it fester. And I can promise that I understand who you are, Quinton. I'm not trying to change you or turn you into something you're not. I just want to be part of your life, messy as it is." "You're already part of it," he said, pulling her closer. "The best part." Winter came, and with it new challenges. Whitney's clinic was busiest during calving season, which meant she was working brutal hours and had little flexibility in her schedule. Quinton found himself making the trip to Montana more often than she could come to him, conducting meetings from the ranch house, much to his board's consternation. "You need to be in New York," his CFO said during a video conference. "The investors are starting to ask questions about your commitment. My commitment hasn't wavered. The company is performing better than ever. That's not the point. They want to see you in the office, not calling in from Montana." "Then they'll be disappointed," Quinton said coolly. "This is the 21st century. I can run the company from anywhere with an internet connection." After he ended the call, he sat staring at his laptop screen. The truth was, the CFO had a point. His frequent absences were causing friction, and some of the old guard on the board were openly questioning his leadership. But every time he thought about giving up the Montana trips, about asking Whitney to be the one to always sacrifice and travel, he felt something twist in his chest. "You're still here," Whitney said that evening when she came home from work, finding him at the kitchen table surrounded by financial reports and empty coffee cups. She kissed the top of his head. "I thought you had a meeting." "I did. It ended. And they think I should be in New York more. They're probably right." Whitney pulled out a chair and sat down, still wearing her work clothes, smelling faintly of antiseptic and hay. "What do you think?" "I think I don't want to be the person I was before I met you. The person who worked 100 hours a week and measured success in quarterly returns and never looked up long enough to notice he was lonely." He reached for her hand. "But I also think I have responsibilities I can't just ignore." "I know you do, and I would never ask you to abandon them." She squeezed his fingers. "But Quinton, maybe it's time to start thinking about what you actually want, not just what you think you should do." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you talk about the company like it's an obligation, not a passion. You've been a billionaire for what, 5 years now? 6? At what point do you get to decide you've proven whatever you needed to prove and start living for yourself?" Her words struck something deep inside him. "It's not that simple, isn't it? You have good people working for you. You could delegate more, trust them to handle things. You could restructure your role, step back from the day-to-day operations." "And do what?" She smiled. "Anything you want. Everything you want. That's the whole point of having money, isn't it? Freedom." Quinton thought about that conversation for days afterward. He had never considered stepping back from the company, never imagined a life that did not revolve around board meetings and investor calls and the constant pressure to grow, to expand, to conquer new markets. But the idea, once planted, took root. He started delegating more, promoting trusted lieutenants, restructuring the management hierarchy to distribute power more evenly. His board resisted at first, concerned about the changes, but the company's performance remained strong, and gradually they accepted the new normal. By spring, Quinton had reduced his time in New York to 1 week per month, handling the rest remotely from Montana. He renovated the ranch house, turning one room into a proper office, updating the internet infrastructure, making it a place where he could actually work instead of just hiding. And slowly, almost without noticing, it began to feel like home. "You're different," Whitney said one evening as they walked through the meadow, wildflowers blooming all around them. "Bad different or good different? Good different. Lighter. Like you've been carrying something heavy and finally set it down." "I feel different," he admitted. "I can't remember the last time I felt this content." She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I'm glad you stayed." "Stayed? You know what I mean. You kept coming back. You didn't let the distance or the complications scare you off." Quinton stopped walking and turned to face her, the setting sun painting everything gold. "I realized something, probably later than I should have. I stopped planning to leave the moment I met you. Every excuse to delay my return to New York, every extended visit, every restructuring of the company, it was all leading here, to this, to you." Whitney's eyes shimmered with tears. "You're still here." "I am, and I'm not going anywhere." He kissed her there in the meadow, with the mountains watching and the sky turning purple and pink overhead. When he finally pulled back, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I had a whole plan for this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A romantic dinner, champagne, maybe a violinist. But standing here with you, this feels more real than any staged proposal could be." Whitney's hand flew to her mouth. "Quinton, I love you, Whitney Vaughn. I love your compassion and your stubbornness and the way you see the best in people. I love that you challenged me to be more than just my job, to want more than just success. I love the life we've built together, the way we've made this work against all odds." He opened the box, revealing a simple platinum band with a single diamond. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and she threw her arms around his neck, kissing him with a fierce joy that made his heart soar. They stood there until the sun disappeared and the stars came out, wrapped in each other, planning their future. They married that summer in a small ceremony on the ranch, with Whitney's colleagues from the clinic and a handful of Quinton's closest business associates in attendance. James served as best man, looking uncomfortable in his suit but grinning broadly. Whitney's best friend from veterinary school stood up with her, wiping tears throughout the entire ceremony. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said, and Quinton kissed his bride as everyone cheered. The reception lasted until dawn, with dancing and laughter and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilarious. Marcus Thompson, who had flown in from New York, pulled Quinton aside near midnight. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About what I said at the gala. You figured out how to make it work." "We figured it out together," Quinton corrected. "That's the difference. She's good for you. You look happy, truly happy, in a way I've never seen you before." "I am," Quinton said, watching Whitney laugh at something James had said. "Happier than I knew I could be." The first year of marriage brought adjustments and compromises, and countless small negotiations about schedules and priorities. But it also brought a depth of partnership that Quinton had never experienced. Whitney kept him grounded, reminded him what mattered when he got too caught up in quarterly projections. He supported her ambitions, helped her navigate the business side of the clinic when the owner retired, and offered to sell it to her and her partners. "It's a huge investment," she said, poring over the financial statements. "I'd have to take out loans, probably work twice as hard as I already do." "You should do it," Quinton said. "You love that place and you have a vision for how to make it better. Don't let fear hold you back." Says the billionaire who can afford to take risks. Says your husband who believes in you. He pulled her onto his lap. "Besides, I know a thing or two about building businesses. Let me help." With his guidance and financial backing, Whitney and her partners bought the clinic and immediately began implementing changes. They hired 2 more vets, expanded the facilities, and started a program to provide low-cost care to ranchers and farmers who were struggling. Within a year, the clinic was thriving, serving twice as many patients and breaking even financially. "You did it," Quinton said, watching her review the annual report with pride glowing in her eyes. "We did it. I couldn't have done this without you. You could have. It would have taken longer, but you would have gotten there." She set down the report and moved to sit beside him on the couch. "Thank you for believing in me, for pushing me to take the risk. Thank you for showing me there's more to life than building empires," he countered. "For teaching me that success isn't just about numbers and market share." In their 3rd year of marriage, Whitney told him she was pregnant. Quinton was in the middle of a conference call when she appeared in his office doorway, holding a positive pregnancy test. He immediately muted the call. "Are you serious?" he asked, standing so quickly his chair rolled backward. "Very serious. We're going to have a baby." He crossed the room in 3 strides and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around while laughter and tears mingled. The executives on the conference call could probably see his empty chair and hear the commotion, but he did not care. Their daughter arrived on a snowy February morning, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Rose after Whitney's grandmother, and Quinton held her in the hospital room with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the tiny weight of her. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She is," Whitney agreed, watching them with tired eyes and a soft smile. "You're going to be a wonderful father." He had not thought much about fatherhood before, had assumed it was something that would happen eventually, but remained abstract. Now, with his daughter sleeping in his arms, he felt the full weight of responsibility and love crash over him. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful and occasionally terrifying. Rose was colicky, crying for hours at a time, and Quinton spent countless nights pacing the floor with her, while Whitney caught a few hours of sleep between feedings. He conducted meetings with spit up on his shoulder, learned to type one-handed while holding a baby, and discovered depths of patience he had not known he possessed. "You're a natural," Whitney said one morning, finding him asleep in the rocking chair with Rose snuggled against his chest. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he mumbled. "None of us do. We're all just figuring it out as we go." As Rose grew, Quinton found himself restructuring his life yet again. He cut his New York trips down to quarterly visits, conducted almost everything remotely, and seriously considered whether he wanted to remain CEO at all. The company was stable, profitable, and well managed. He had proven whatever he needed to prove, had built something that would outlast him. "What would you do if you weren't running the company?" Whitney asked one night after they had put Rose to bed. "I have no idea. I've been doing this for so long, I'm not sure who I am without it." "You're a husband and a father. You're someone who cares about conservation and protecting wild spaces. You're someone who asks good questions and actually listens to the answers." She paused. "You're more than your job, Quinton. You always have been." He thought about his grandfather then, about the land Thomas Reed had protected and the legacy he had tried to pass down, about the conservation trust that Quinton had once planned to dissolve. "I want to do something with the land," he said slowly. "Not just maintain it, but use it. Education programs, maybe. Research partnerships with universities. Something that makes a difference." Whitney's face lit up. "That's perfect. You could create a foundation, bring in experts, really make an impact." The idea consumed him. He threw himself into research, consulting with environmentalists and educators, developing a vision for what the property could become. Within a year, he had established the Thomas Reed Conservation Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to environmental education and wildlife protection. He donated most of the Montana property to the foundation, built a small education center, and began hosting school groups and research teams. "This is what he wanted," Whitney said during the grand opening, watching children from the local elementary school learn about native plants. "Your grandfather would be proud." "I think he would," Quinton agreed. "I'm finally using the degree I got to spite him for a purpose he would have approved of." On Rose's third birthday, Quinton officially stepped down as CEO of his shipping company, transitioning to chairman of the board with a much lighter involvement in day-to-day operations. The business press speculated wildly about his reasons, but he did not bother to explain. The people who mattered understood. "Any regrets?" James asked during a rare visit to Montana. "Not even one," Quinton said, watching Rose toddle around the yard while Whitney chased her. "I spent 15 years building that company and I'm proud of what we accomplished. But this is what I want to build now. This family, this foundation, this life. You're a lucky man. I'm a man who met the right woman at the right time and was smart enough not to walk away," Quinton corrected. "Everything else followed from that." Rose grew into a bright, curious child who loved animals and the outdoors. She followed Whitney to the clinic, helping feed orphaned fawns and trailing after her mother during barn calls. She helped Quinton at the education center, explaining to visitors with great seriousness about the importance of protecting habitats. She was the perfect blend of both her parents, stubborn and compassionate and fearless. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinton and Whitney escaped for a long weekend alone, leaving Rose with Whitney's aunt. They hiked to the same meadow where he had proposed, the wildflowers in full bloom just as they had been a decade earlier. "You remember what you said to me that day?" Whitney asked, sitting in the grass with her head on his shoulder. "I said a lot of things. I was nervous. You said you stopped planning to leave the moment you met me. I did say that, and I meant it. I know. I think about that sometimes, about how differently things could have turned out. If the storm had hit an hour later, if I'd taken a different road, if you'd already left for New York. But you didn't, and I didn't, and here we are." "Here we are," she echoed. 10 years, 1 daughter, 2 businesses, and a conservation foundation later. "When you put it that way, we've been pretty busy." She laughed and turned to kiss him. "I love you, Quinton Reed. I love the man you were and the man you've become and every version in between. I love you too. You're still the best thing that ever happened to me, still the reason I know what home feels like." They stayed in the meadow until sunset, just as they had on the night he proposed, holding each other and watching the sky turn colors that seemed impossible. Quinton thought about the man he had been that stormy night 10 years ago, so certain he was leaving, so convinced that Montana was just another property to liquidate and move on from. He had not understood then that some places and some people had the power to change everything. 2 years later, Whitney gave birth to their son Thomas, named for Quinton's grandfather. The boy had his mother's easy smile and his father's determination, and from the moment he could walk, he was following his sister everywhere. "We make good kids," Quinton said, watching Rose teach Thomas how to identify bird calls. "We do," Whitney agreed. "Although I'm not sure I have energy for a third. 2 is perfect. This is perfect." And it was. The foundation continued to grow, hosting thousands of students each year, partnering with research institutions, making real impacts on conservation policy. The clinic thrived, becoming a model for rural veterinary care. The shipping company performed well under new leadership, and Quinton's careful restructuring meant it would continue to provide jobs and opportunities for decades to come. But the real success, the measure that mattered most, was the family they had built. The love that filled their home, the laughter that echoed through the ranch house, the sense that they were exactly where they were meant to be. On Rose's 10th birthday, the whole extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. James was there with his new wife, along with several of Quinton's former executives who had become genuine friends over the years. Whitney's clinic partners came, along with what seemed like half the town of Whitefish. The house overflowed with people and noise and joy. "This is nice," James said, finding Quinton on the deck where he had escaped for a moment of quiet. "Chaotic, but nice." "It's everything," Quinton said simply. "You ever miss it? The adrenaline of running a massive company, the high-stakes negotiations, the power." Quinton considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the satisfaction of closing a big deal, but that's ego, not fulfillment. This is fulfillment." He gestured at the scene inside where Whitney was helping Rose blow out candles while Thomas tried to steal frosting from the cake. "This is what matters. When did you get so wise?" "The night a woman showed up on my doorstep during a storm and proceeded to turn my entire world upside down. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment." That night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Quinton and Whitney sat on the back deck under the stars, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "Thank you," Quinton said quietly. "For what?" "For showing up that night. For taking a chance on me. For building this life with me." Whitney snuggled closer. "You're still here." "I am, and I always will be. Promise, promise. You're stuck with me, Whitney Reed, for better or worse as long as we both shall live." "I can live with that," she said, and kissed him under the stars. just like they had 1,000 times before and would 1,000 times again. Years passed, marked by birthdays and holidays and the small, significant moments that make up a life. Rose went to college to study environmental science, following in her great-grandfather's footsteps. Thomas showed an unexpected gift for business and spent his summers working at his father's former company, learning from the team Quinton had built. The foundation expanded, adding wildlife rehabilitation facilities and research laboratories. Quinton's hair turned gray, then white, but his eyes remained sharp, and his love for Whitney never dimmed. They celebrated 25 years of marriage with a trip to Italy, just the two of them, rediscovering the simple pleasure of being alone together. They became grandparents when Rose had twin daughters, and Quinton held those tiny girls with the same wonder he had felt holding his own children. "We did good," Whitney said one evening, watching their grandchildren play in the same meadow where Quinton had proposed so many years ago. "We did," he agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible. Any regrets? Not even one. Everything I have, everything I am started the night you knocked on my door. You're still the best thing that ever happened to me." Whitney took his hand, their fingers fitting together with the ease of decades of practice. "You're still here." "Always," Quinton said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I stopped leaving the moment I met you, and I've never looked back." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. The ranch house stood solid behind them, filled with the evidence of their life together, photographs and children's drawings and decades of memories. The foundation buildings rose in the distance, a legacy that would outlast them both. But the real legacy was here, in the love they had built, in the family they had raised, in the choice Quinton had made all those years ago to stay instead of leave. He had been a billionaire seeking an exit, a man running from connection, certain that his path led back to steel and glass towers and the lonely heights of success. But Whitney had shown him a different path, one that led to wildflower meadows and starlit nights and the incomparable wealth of being truly known and deeply loved. "I'm still here," he said again, the words a promise and a prayer and a statement of fact. "I'm still here, and I'm never leaving." Whitney smiled and rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the stars come out together, just as they had done countless times before and would do countless times more, bound by love and choice and the irrevocable decision to build a life together. In the end, Quinton Reed discovered that the greatest fortune was not measured in billions but in moments, not in power but in partnership, not in leaving but in staying. And he stayed, rooted in love, anchored by family, home at last in the place where his heart had always belonged.